Good morning, everyone. Today, I'm going to share some really cool tidbits about our city. These are things that I've discovered over the last year or so with my parents. As Brad just shared, getting out of the house was a motivation for the drives in 2020, but it turned out that it was time for the three of us to be together, just us and the open road of our dear Kansas City. So I'm going to share some highlights of what we've seen. If you look on the left, these are houses in an area called Nutterville. And Nutterville is this small blink and you're going to miss it area between the plaza and Westport. It's just a couple of blocks long, but these were houses that were built in the mid and late 1800s and were starting to be run down. And local real estate company, James B. Nutter, decided to resurrect them. So they painted them these bright colors and did this great landscaping out front. And they are now home to small businesses in this area. So this is a great little gem if you love just driving by and looking at stuff. The next picture, did you guys know we had a bridge to nowhere here in Kansas City? I didn't. If you can see where the arrows are, you can see that the bridge just goes from one piece of grass to the other. This was built in the 70s and it's on I-70 between Indiana and Benton Boulevards, in case you want to know that. So this bridge has been here for about 50 years unused. Dad and I drove by here to see if we could tell where it began and where it ended, and you can't. It just looks like another overpass if you're driving on I-70, and we drove around the neighborhood and we couldn't see it. But something totally interesting about this is because it's just been sitting there for about 50 years, people at UMKC are studying it to see how steel and cement and asphalt react to weather, since there's not been any traffic on it to wear and tear it. So that's something interesting that's come out of that. Next, I'd like to talk about a little history. On the left, a sad piece of history that I was not aware of here in Kansas City is that we have underground railroad stops on the Kansas side. I didn't know that. And it makes sense. Missouri was a slave state. Kansas was a free state. So people would cross the Missouri River to Kansas. And this is an area in Kansas City, Kansas, by the Missouri River where people would cross. And the system would take people north, either to Nebraska or to Canada. So we have a lot of Underground Railroad history here in Kansas City. In the middle, you see a fountain. And as you know, Kansas City is known as a city of fountains. And how that started was in the 1800s, there was a lot of horse traffic through Kansas City. We're on the Missouri River. Lots of people would come here and move out throughout the United States. And there were a lot of horses getting diseases because of the stagnant water. And so a veterinarian designed a trough with moving water to help prevent disease. That is what we call a fountain now. And this picture you see here is the last remaining horse fountain in our area from that era. So this was a working horse fountain back in the day. And then later in the 1890s, Kansas City hired a planner who loved fountains and used it to beautify our city. And then several decades later, J.C. Nichols added lots of fountains to the plaza. And there you have a city of fountains. And then something I think is real cool on the right, did you guys know that we were one of the hubs for film and equipment distribution in Hollywood, for Hollywood from the 1920s to the 1960s? I didn't know that, but this is a picture of a building for Paramount Studios, and we had a whole several blocks of just studio stuff here in Kansas City. Unfortunately, there's nothing left of it, which was really sad to hear, but it's the Crossroad District is where it is now, but that used to be home to Hollywood in Kansas City. I'd like to share a story I heard from my mom. One of the ways that we discover on places to go is listening to what people share, stories they share. And this happened when we went to downtown Kansas City, Kansas to see my mom's former workplace. She was in the newspaper business and she worked at the Kansas City Kansan. This is located downtown KCK, also known as Strawberry Hill area. And in addition, the Huron Cemetery is there, which is a Native American cemetery. And Mom had mentioned a story that she knew about some sisters protecting the cemetery. And I thought, that sounds really interesting. I'm going to check this out. So what you see here is Lyda Conley, and she and her sisters Helena and Ida were orphaned as teenagers, which basically meant that they raised themselves. But these were some really badass sisters, I'm telling you. So what they did is they lived in a makeshift shack on the cemetery, and they had taken it upon themselves to protect it from trespassers. And you guys, they used their father's shotgun. So can you imagine 3 women dressed like this with their dad's shotgun telling people to leave the cemetery? And I just love that vigil. I mean, just think about it. They're like, look at me, like, get away, move on, mister. And the reason they were doing this is their family was buried there. But in addition, people were trying to relocate the cemetery somewhere else because it is in downtown KCK. They developers wanted to use the land, and those sisters protected it. Lyda was so passionate about it, she decided to go to law school, and she eventually took this case to the Supreme Court. Now, she didn't win, but eventually the sisters defending the cemetery grew enough public interest that a Kansas senator passed a bill protecting the cemetery from future development. So it is protected even to this day. Don't you guys just love this story? I mean, it's a great example of 2 things. One, someone making a passing comment and me looking at it and just being curious about it and seeing where it leads. And that led into this wonderful, inspirational story about girl power. I think Marvel needs to make a movie about these women because they're pretty kick-ass. Here are some resources that I use to find the places that we go. Lots of things to do, lots and lots of Googling. The book you see here, a woman in Kansas City wrote. The one behind it is just one of those you can get at the grocery store that talks about things to do in the city. But I have to say some of the most interesting places are like what I just told you, in that paying attention to what people share or what they say. I share our adventures on social media, and lots of people give me ideas, and they have been super great. Like, I love those items. So we started out, the 3 of us, getting out of the house to get ice cream and to drive around. And then it turned into a thing for my parents and I. This is what we looked like in April of 2020. We were ready to get moving. This is what we look like now. The drives no longer include my mom, who passed away in January. They're quieter, but they provide a great comfort for my father and I. At the beginning, I was shoving everything I could into our drives. And what I've learned is that what's important is the time we set aside for ourselves. We see the city, we talk about current events, and it is our time together. Our drives are different. And what I do know is that Dad and I, we're figuring things out, one move and one Sunday at a time. Thank you.